I am Daniel Solomon Wagner. I was born early the morning of February 16th, 1930. I was born at home. I almost did not make it. I remember Mama saying that I would not have made it if it were not for modern medicine. It took about 4 minutes to get me breathing, and it took about 4 minutes to get me breathing. This was on Parker Road, about 7 miles east of Modesto, California. Papa farmed his own place, my aunts Mary and Celeste's place, plus Mr. Halley's place to the east. We milked cows, plus we milked cows, first by hand, raised chickens and rabbits. Once Papa had a flock of turkeys. Papa did not get their wing feathers clipped in time, and one evening they spooked, as turkeys will do, and flew west to Uncle Ernest's eucalyptus grove. Next morning the turkeys were gone. But when Grandpa Wagner went out to take care of his turkeys, he found wall-to-wall, or rather fence-to-fence turkeys. Grandpa and Papa marketed the turkeys and divided the proceeds. I remember Grandpa weighing me on these turkey scales, old-fashioned scales with a big hook on the bottom that I had to hang on to till he got my weight. "Pull your feet up," he'd say. I loved my grandpa. Papa and Mama were both of the belief that any education beyond 8th grade was unnecessary, probably even wrong. So I did not start school until I was 7. That was in 1937. We were in the Milne School District, but our road to the east was not open. The Empire bus stopped a half-mile west, so I went to Empire School until the 4th grade. With Parker Road now open, we were transferred to Milne, way out in the country. All my teachers were good, pleasant teachers except 7th grade. Mrs. Anderson was a city girl and apparently resented being placed in the country school. She favored the girls, but the girls could see it through all, and they didn't appreciate it either. The next year, we got a new teacher, and what a change. Mrs. Gardner later said we were the best class she ever taught. Mrs. Anderson had said we were the worst. Mrs. Gardner, while she could be very concerned about our learning, could be a real mischief. If things got too quiet and orderly, she could change that. She was almost as mischievous as some of her students. And later, Mrs. Gardner went on to be the Stanislaus County Superintendent of Schools. Later, I finished my high school and got my diploma at Modesto Evening High School. That was later, after I was grown, that I went to the evening high school and got my diploma. My father, Clay, was born in Quinter, Kansas, September 8th, 1899. When he was about a year old, Grandpa, along with others, bought land on west at Sheridan Lake, Colorado. Sheridan Lake is 1,000 feet higher elevation than Quinter, and farming there was difficult. This is where Papa, that is Clay, grew up. Grandpa was a fisherman, and every fall would seine the lakes there around Sheridan Lake, and then he would load the wagon with fish, take my father, he's just a little boy then, and would go south peddling fish as they went. This is one of the high points in my father's young life. Papa said that as they went, the fish got fishier and the price got lower. There were cousins to be with. They went to a little one-room school with Mr. Dennison as teacher. Mr. Dennison loved to have a good time. On one occasion, he trusted some of his students a little too far. It was winter time, zero weather. At dismissal, Mr. Dennison told some of the older boys that he had built the fire too high. He had company coming and needed to get home. He asked the older boys if they'd just stick around until the fire died down, and Mr. Dennison went home. The boys looked at that hot fire, and somebody asked what would happen if they threw some water in on the fire. And they did. Dan Wolf told us he could remember very well. Throw a cup of water in, dash outside to see this cloud of steam and smoke from the chimney into the cold winter air. Then do it again. It wasn't very long till there was no more steam or smoke or fire. The boys had done their job, so they went home. Next morning, oh my, the school was cold. Mr. Dennison was at his desk, but all smudged with soot. He said, "Don't ever do that again." He said the stove was a solid block of dirty, sooty ice. He had barely got a weak fire started when the children began arriving. Now, Mr. Dennison was a believing man. Papa said he would read a chapter from the Bible every morning. Cousin Jim liked mischief, and Mr. Dennison would challenge him. On one day, Mr. Dennison came out on the front step of the school with the bell in his hand. "Jim," he said, "I can jump up and pop my heels together twice before I come down." "Let's see you do it," Jim says. And he did. "Bet you can't do it 3 times, says Jim. Well, Mr. Dennison wasn't sure, but he would try. He got down and made a great leap. He should have known better. Jim brought his shoulder up and into Mr. Dennison, who went flying, landing out in the grass, his bell going clanging another way. Now, Mr. Dennison was a believing man. Papa said he would read a chapter from the Bible every morning. Cousin Jim liked mischief, and Mr. Dennison would challenge him. On one day, Mr. Dennison came out on the front step of the school with the bell in his hand. "Jim," he said, "I can jump up and pop my heels together twice before I come down." "Let's see you do it," Jim says. And he did. "Bet you can't do it 3 times, says Jim. Well, Mr. Dennison wasn't sure, but he would try. He got down and made a great leap. He should have known better. Jim brought his shoulder up and into Mr. Dennison, who went flying, landing out in the grass, his bell going clanging another way. Jim liked playing tricks on people. One backfired on him. The people scattered across the plains ordered telephones. Many places they used the top wire of the barbed wire fence. It worked well until Cousin Jim would twist the top wire into the lower wires and would ground the line out. One day Jim went to see Uncle Jess. He saw that Uncle Jess was talking on the phone, and there was a spring disconnect where the line could be disconnected in case of a thunderstorm. Jim thought it would be fun to unhook Uncle Jess. But Uncle Jess saw what was going on, so he got a hold of the ringing crank, and as Jim got a firm grip on the disconnect, Uncle Jess started ringing. Jim could not let go. Uncle Jess said Jim's hands were going around and around just keeping pace with the telephone crank. One day, Jim had an episode that could have been worse. He would set the prairie grass on fire, knock the fire out of his coat. He was teasing his little brother, who was terribly scared. He got bolder and bolder in setting the fire and letting the fire burn longer each time, and it got away. Neighbors came, got a fire break plowed, and got the fire stopped. As the men stood around talking, the question was, what should be done to anyone who would set the prairie on fire? One man said, I don't think that hanging is too good for anybody who would do a thing like that. This time Jim was scared. Now Sheridan Lake is 1,000 feet higher in elevation than Quinter out in Kansas, and farming was difficult. Something had to be done. A land agent showed up and sold several land in southern Mexico in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Grandpa Wagner was one of them. It was a total loss. None of them ever got clear title. Grandpa moved his family to Reedley, California, and moved in with his brother, Uncle Clay. Grandpa was a member with the Church of the Brethren, and there was a church in Reedley. But Grandpa was very hard of hearing and did not go to church. Finally, Grandma said, if you are not going to your church, why don't we go to Modesto where I can go to mine? And they did. My father Clay was a teenager at Reedley and went to high school there. He would tell us swimming in the Kings River there. My mother, Orpha Price, was born in Michigan on September 18, 1902. The winters were cold and hard. In 1909, Grandpa moved his family by train to California and bought a place in Salida. Grandpa was a carpenter. It was here that certain church members met in 1915 and took their stand with the Old Brethren Church. Mama worked for people in Modesto. She would ride the train. Fare was 10 cents. Papa and Mama were married at her parents' home at Merced on September 16, 1925. The Old Brethren Church had separated about 1929 to 30. My first memories were before we had electricity, phone, or a car. I can remember riding to meeting in the buggy on a frosty Sunday morning behind old Skip, one of the nicest driving horses that ever was. Mama had bundled me up in a heavy furry coat. It was scary looking through all that fur. I've always been rather claustrophobic. About 1936, Papa and Mama went back to Salida and got a car and put in electricity. Papa found a big wood gas... I'll start that over. Papa found a big wood gas stove. It had a big wood firebox at the left end and had a gas burner. The firebox had water pipes in it. Papa plumbed all this with our gas water heater. We had a 3,000-gallon covered water tank and a windmill. There was also a gasoline pop engine and a pump jack in case the wind didn't blow. I remember the evening we turned on our new lights and my little brother exclaiming, "Oh, I'm so glad we got electric." Oh, yes. We would buy peach pits in 100-pound bags and burn them. from them in the wood stove. Peach pits will produce a gas sometimes as they get hot and then explode. Blow the stove lids off. Just a little excitement. Kaboom! The peach pits remind me, out in the high plains, Quinter and Sharon Lake, there were deposits of pop rocks. If these got in a fire, the sulfur in them would make them explode, blowing the stove open and the lids off. These rocks were black, so they were not noticed in the coal bucket. How did they get in the coal bucket? Who knows? As a child, I don't remember anything very outstanding. One nice spring day, I was flying my kite in the cow pasture. I got some naughty thoughts and started dive bombing old Star, our best Guernsey cow. Star soon figured it out and started watching the kite. Her big head's looking up, going round, and then shudder for the next zap. I include this episode by request, and certainly do not recommend it to our dairymen's children and young folks. I suspect that old Star's production was not quite up to par that evening. We had the usual farm animals: cats, rabbits, chickens, baby calves, etc. My younger brothers did the milking at home. I milked Mr. Halley's cows for 4.5 years. We three boys did the farm work. Alvin was born in 1942, so we had a baby brother. Alvin got whooping cough at about a year, nearly died. That really scared our parents. Uncle Dave and Aunt Elsie Wolf had a phone they did not want, so Papa bought the share in the Sylvan Telephone Company, a farmer's line. Telephone number 140F13. One long, three shorts. Papa installed the phone himself. My first car was a 1928 Chevrolet, one seat, blue. The first I drove was Papa's Fordson tractor. Disking was my job, and there was lots of it. 1940 and 1949, Mr. Halley got a neighbor to take over his dairy operation. I tried working for a neighbor to the north of us. He was a poor manager with strange ideas. Then I got a good job with the vegetable dehydrator in Modesto. That was a very good job. I often wonder what would have developed if I could have stayed. There was never any question about my standing as a conscientious objector, but I had 2 years to serve. The officer told me that it would help them if I found my own job from their list. My brother Eugene was also in the same situation. We wanted to serve our times together. None of the places in northern or central California would take 2 people. So Eugene and I found ourselves on the way to Southern California. The manager at Los Angeles Goodwill only had opening for 1. What about Santa Ana? I was soon connected to Mr. Angney. I worked at Santa Ana at Goodwill over 4 years. We attended meeting at the Old German Baptist Church, Whittier, and were just accepted as one of the crowd. Many Sunday dinners we enjoyed in their homes. Joe and Leslie Cover served their time at Los Angeles, so we were often together on weekends and took several short trips together. Our cousin Alan also did his time at Los Angeles. Eugene served his 2 years and went home. Joseph then came down and served his 2 years. By this time, real changes had taken place in the Goodwill. Every day began with a half-hour chapel service, quite fundamental when we first started there, and we were welcome and respected. Wages were also low, but we had lots of overtime, which really helped our finances. Then Mr. Angney passed on, and things changed. The new management was very liberal, evangelical teaching, a nothing-to-do religion. Also, they took away our overtime, so Joseph and I came home. At Santa Ana, we were just a few miles from the ocean. Beautiful coastline. We drove over into Mexico. The Rumorosa Mountains east of Tijuana are fantastic. Rocks as big as houses all tumbled together. I really enjoyed my time in Southern California. While in Santa Ana, I had bought a shop of shoe repair equipment, so I ran a shoe repair shop in Empire. Not very successful. I about broke even. After a couple of years, I gave up, went to work for Orville Bowman in his chicken business, other farm work. Then Thelma Garber got in the picture. This is the way I remember it. It was Christmas time in 1962. Word came to me that Thelma was in California, so I got up the nerve, not easy for me, and called her. She agreed to have supper together at the old Hoosier Inn in Stockton. Then we drove down to Christmas Tree Lane in Fresno. It was foggy time of the year, but that evening was so clear and nice. I believe this trip was when we really got to know each other. 1963 was quite a year for us. Thelma accepted my proposal in February, and on November 2nd, we were joined in holy matrimony by Thelma's father in their home. So on November 2nd, 2013, that will be 50 years ago. We milk cows, and cows can be quite funny at times. At milking time, there were always cats around begging for a warm milk handout. The cats never learned that cows have hard feet, that is, hooves. So inevitably, the cats got their tails stepped on. The cats protested loudly. The cows wouldn't even move, just go on placidly chewing their feed. We would have to poke the cow so she'd move her foot and release the howling kitty. In those days, that was in the 30s, the 40s, there was a line of pills that came in little half-inch tubes made of glass with a cork in one end. When the cats were clamoring for milk, I'd dip one of these little vials in the warm milk, put the cork on, let the cats have it. What a clicking of teeth. The cats tried to eat those little glass vials. Then I'd pour them a pan of milk, and they would all dive in. We also had a father cow named Jumbo. Jumbo would meet me as I drive in with my Model A Ford. I would stop, rev the engine, let up on the gas, and retard the spark. How that Model A would backfire. Poor Jumbo would jump, shake all over, and just roar at me. Then I'd drive on in, leaving Jumbo till next time. A drunken cow, our nice black cow, came staggering in at milking time. Papa was worried and called our veterinary, Papa's nephew, Earl Wagner. Earl laughed, said nothing wrong with your cow except she's dead drunk. Drunk? How? Well, apricots had proven unprofitable, so Papa decided to turn the land into a pasture. He planted Ladina clover and left the trees for later. We had a bumper crop of apricots that year. Papa watered, that is, flooded the new clover just as the trees dropped all that fruit. It lay in the water and soured and fermented. I can still remember that smell. Our black cow thought it was delicious, and so a drunk cow. In those days, we milked by hand, sitting on a one-legged milk stool. Papa would fall asleep while milking. He'd just sit there till he woke up and went on milking. I've seen him do it many times. We always used kickers. We called them hobbles, so the cow would not step in the bucket. This time Papa did it again. First thing Papa remembered was the black cow just coming down on top of him. She must have gone to sleep too. Papa was knocked off the milk stool. His legs were under the cow. So was the smashed milk bucket. The cow's head was in the stanchions, her back feet, legs held by the kickers. It took a little while for Papa to get it all straightened out and including the bucket. Mama's brother Arvine married Rose Troisi. The Troisis were very hospitable, friendly people. Uncle Arvine, he was known as Jerry, was helping with their milking when a salesman walked in. The cows had their heads in stanchions. There was a walkway behind the cows. Here stood the salesman giving his message. Now, cows can get very loose bowels, and cows sometimes cough. Any of us who worked with cows never stand behind a cow. The salesman did. Suddenly, the cow had to go, and she coughed. That poor salesman was just splattered with very fresh cow manure. He left. My parents had a few olive trees. One day, Uncle Arvine's and Aunt Rose came with her parents. Papa asked Mr. Troisi what he should do with these olive trees. "Oh," says Mr. Troisi, "you have a pruning shear, a pruning saw? You get, I fix." Papa said it didn't look like there would be any tree left. But those trees put out new growth, and how they did produce. Later there was a surplus of olives, and they fell thick on the ground. Robins just came in flocks to eat those bitter olives. When I was in the 4th grade at Empire, the Gideons put Bibles in our classrooms. When I had extra time, I would read in that Bible. In fact, this is where I really found out that I could read. I got a Halley's Pocket Bible Handbook. When I was about 19, I was baptized in a Modesto irrigation canal at Sisk Road, northeast of Salida. by Joseph I. Cover. Papa was a deacon, and I went with him shopping for the church and locating baptizing sites. Concerning our children's names, we never even thought of using all Bible names. We used some family names we liked. We finally got a scare when Mary got away from us in Carlsbad, New Mexico. They found her about the same time we realized she was gone. She was at a motel about a block or so away. One event took place that showed the children were ready to protect each other. Mommy, that is Thelma, said, "Daniel, go get one of those big cabbage heads out of the garden." So I grabbed little Martha. She was a year old then. I grabbed Martha up under my left arm, getting the big butcher knife. I said, "All right, let's go cut this thing's head off." And what a reaction. Anna Marie, she's about 5 then, started to cry, and then Danny, he started to scream. I finally got things quieted down and finally gathered up Martha with the others following, got our cabbage head. Oh yes, why was I afraid to go upstairs? I was afraid of the woodpecker. I was afraid the woodpecker would get me. Well, it's like this. Our big farmhouse was not finished yet upstairs. That came later. I was just a little boy then. The upstairs was just one big room. The house had redwood siding, and how that flicker wood and how the flicker woodpeckers loved that redwood siding. They would peck their way in and then could not find their way out. Papa, that is Clay, tried to shoot them with his .410 shotgun. The concussion from that blast was terrific in that big open upstairs room. When I overheard my mother telling someone about it. She says, "Clay shot that woodpecker and it just about got him." And believe me, if that woodpecker just about got my papa, I didn't want to face him. Some want me to tell about the time my Grandpa Dan Wagner and Uncle Dave went hunting in Wyoming. They were both young men then. Dave was not very quick-witted. Took a little while for things to sink in, a trait that I share. They were in the hills when they spotted an antelope. There was a hill beyond the antelope. Dan told Dave to stay there, and I'll back that antelope closer so you can shoot him. Dan went away around back of the hill beyond the antelope. Dan put his hat on the end of his gun. Dan put his hat on the end of his gun barrel and raised it up so the antelope could see it. The antelope came to attention and backed up right toward Dave. Dave was so fascinated that he just stood there. This was repeated a few times until the antelope simply backed into Dave. This caused a confused scramble, and the antelope was on his way. Dave just staring at him. Dave hollered, "Shoot him!" Dan hollered, "Shoot him!" Dave finally gathered his wits together, raised his gun, fired, and down came the antelope. A perfect shot, a perfect pelt. Yes, when they dressed the animal out, no gunshot wound could be found. Remember, the antelope was going away, so besides all the meat, they had a perfect deerskin or pelt. There were some interesting things in our work at the Goodwill. One woman wanted to do our laundry. It was a failure. Some suggested that she washed her clothes in the Santa Ana River. The problem being that the Santa Ana was usually dry. Then there was the old Italian shoe cobbler that I worked with, who decided that I needed help with my lunch. He would bring me green bean sandwiches, thick Italian bread with olive oil on it, and filled with green beans. One thing we will never forget is Red, the jumping cow. We never figured what started it. Red was a very skittish cow. One evening I was outside the barn when the most awful bellowing, actually roaring, came from the barn. I looked in to see Red's rear end going up and down in great leaps. What set her off we never knew. Her head was in the stanchions. She had the kickers on. She was leaping a couple feet off the floor and just roaring. I suppose most dairymen would have turned such a cow into hamburger, but Papa kept her. Another time, Papa forgot to take the kickers off of Red when he let her out of the stanchions. Most cows would hobble a few steps and just stand till we got the kickers off. Not Red. When Papa opened the stanchions, too late he realized he had forgotten the kickers. Red reared back, sat down, was out the door in a great leap, then across the corral and pasture in great leaps like a jackrabbit, straight to the pond. A few more leaps to the deepest part. When Papa got there, there were just bubbles coming up. Papa was prepared to jump in to attempt to rescue his cow when up she came like a monster from the deep. A couple more leaps out of the pond, and she was ready to stand still. Papa got the kickers off. When I was about 12 to 13, Papa took his old fruit sled and made a raft. The pond was a pretty big one, and I would pole all around over that pond. I'd sit out there and read in the shade of the willows and the poplars. Often I'd take Goldie, my orange cat, along. As we would get close to the shore, the cat would get desperate to get off. I had to really hold on to him to keep him from jumping into the water. It was a job to control the raft and a struggling, yowling cat at the same time. So one time I decided to let Goldie have his way. I just left him on the raft as I brought it to shore. About 10 feet out, he started preparing to jump. Another couple of feet, and he couldn't wait, and made a big leap, landing in the water a few feet out. Now, cats can swim very well, but they hate water, and he let me know about it. He started to yowl, but in the water, as he yowled, he sank, ending in a yowling burble. This was repeated several times till he got to land. Shook himself off and started the drying process in the summer sunshine. I thought it was funny, but Goldie did not. Oh yes, there was another cow incident. One nice day I noticed a cow standing calmly chewing her cud right against the barn. In our hot climate, the barns had vertical siding with about 3/8-inch cracks between the boards. That was to make the barns well ventilated, and I was naughty. I took a weed stalk, doubled for strength, and poked the cow through the crack. My, oh my! How that cow did kick, and what a crash! The siding held. It did not break, but the cow, poor thing, I was watching through a crack, went limping across the corral and stood there holding the kicking foot up, looking back at the barn like, what in the world happened? Now, to bring these scattered thoughts and happenings to a conclusion, I'm now, 2013, 83 years old. I'm feeling some of the effects of old age. What are my favorite hymns? Bible stories, scriptures. I suppose that Jesus sums it up in John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Of hymns, perhaps Amazing Grace, but as conservatives, we still use the little hymn book published in 1882. It has many hymns that are dear to us. Jesus says, "Behold, I come quickly. Even so, come, Lord Jesus." May we be ready. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieve. How precious did that grace appear. The hour I first believed, through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when